that explosion.
Yeah, two
Yeah,
people killed, and they pulled a woman out after yelling. I mean, I saw the building. I mean, it's just leveled. It's flat. It looks
covered with
like
chocolate.
yeah. There's chocolate
I'll
everywhere.
bet.
So
Wasn't a Hershey's plant, was it?
no, it was R.M. Palmer Company, and I
Mm.
guess they make specialty chocolates. But what on earth would blow a chocolate plant up? I guess they use a lot of gas for what cooking, heating up the chocolate and mixing it and all that.
Well, chocolate is a bean, so they got to get it down to that liquid somehow. Yeah,
Yep, they got to do
Here we go.
that. And then,
and heat it up.
did you see all?
All right, Doc, you're up. An anomaly.
Announced the Chicago Bears on the radio up there in Chicago for the Bears team, and I got to tell you, I've never worked with anybody like Ken. He could just shoehorn himself right into any situation or any conversation we had going on. He was a really bright guy. I enjoyed having him as my wingman, and I will miss him a lot. I really will, Joe.
Yeah, I will too. He was a wonderful guy, and you did a pretty good job there of sort of synopsizing in a couple of minutes a vast and impressive career that he had. And he was beloved. And he was beloved because he was somebody that genuinely wanted to be a good assistant, whether that meant personally, professionally, just who he was. And it's not enough to say that he's going to be missed. He was a special, special guy. And his contributions to us professionally were vast, but his what he meant to us personally is it can't be overstated.
No, it can't. And you know what always impressed me about him is, I would say, Ken, have you made in six figures as a radio guy? He said, "Oh no, we don't make that kind of money." And I said, "Well, why are you doing this?" He said, "I just love it. Really was a labor of love for him." And I can't tell you how impressed I was with that kind of commitment. I mean, I love what I'm doing, but of course, I want to be in a profession where I can make a decent living. And fortunately, his wife also works. Her makes money and brings it into the household, so they were able to get their kids through college and have a good lifestyle and a nice retirement home down here. And you have to admire and respect him for that. But oh my gosh, Joe, I just cannot overstate the importance of stop smoking, take your medications, follow your doctor's advice, keep your weight down, stay active. And if you're concerned that you may have a heart attack, then you need to come in and let me or another cardiologist work you up. And behind me, if you're watching on one of the live streams, there's an artery that feeds part of the heart muscle. You can see the heart on the other side there. And what happens is plaque builds up and inflammation from tobacco and cholesterol and other factors come into play. And then you can form an acute break in that plaque. It can tear apart, and the plaque can have platelets stick to it, and then it starts the whole clotting mechanism. Then you've got a blood clot in that artery, and the blood can't flow down to the heart. Well, guess what? Like all of our tissues, you got to have oxygen, you got to have sugar, you got to have fatty acids so that you can perform the work that the cells are meant to do. And so when that happens, you have a heart attack, and that's in the common parlance. Coronary thrombosis is a heart attack. And that's different from cardiac arrest, where the heart stops beating or doesn't beat effectively, where it can't pump blood out of the chamber, even though there may be open blood vessels going to the muscle. So arrest is the old French word arrête. And when William the Conqueror came into and defeated the Anglo-Saxons at the Battle of Hastings in 1066 and took over, he was speaking French, because the Norsemen, the Vikings that had taken over that part of northwest France at the mouth of the Seine River, and the Seine leads from the English Channel to Paris. They made a pact with the French king that they wouldn't attack him if he would give them that land, and they would protect him from other Vikings coming down. So when they came across the Channel and conquered Harold at the Battle of Hastings and the Anglo-Saxons, they brought French with them. And so the collision of the Old English, Old German, Anglo-Saxon, and the new French language that came in gave us a lot of French words, and one of them is arrête, arrest, stop, and it means stop. And so what the Anglo-Saxons would have first come in contact with that word would be when the Norman police were chasing them, or the soldiers, and telling them, stop, arrête, arrête. And so I'm sure that was one of the first French words that got into the language, and the collision of those two languages gave us our modern English. And Ken had a really good grasp of the language. He was quite impressive with his ability to speak and to keep up with an English major like me. And I appreciated that. I appreciated having somebody on who just didn't say, "Oh, I didn't know that." "Oh, yeah, really, Doc?" I mean, he jumped right in, Joe. He was there, and if he didn't know, he'd say, "I didn't know that. That's new to me."
Right. He wasn't fake smart.
That kind of candidness, I guess is the word.
Candor.
Involvement. Very impressive guy.
Yeah, he really was.
We love him, and we'll miss him a lot.
No doubt. And you're right. He was a very bright fellow. He was very talented. He had a lot of skill being a radio man, but he was just a sharp guy generally. And more than that, I mean, being smart is one thing, but he was also very caring. And that's the characteristic about him that I'm going to remember the most, is that he had a big heart. He really cared for people. He genuinely thought that the work that he was doing here on the radio was helping people. Of his whole career, reporting the news, being able to get it accurate. You talk about being able to speak well and being a newsman for all those years. He had to, hone those skills. And, he worked, underneath my supervision, but he was a very much more experienced man in the business. And I learned a lot from him over the years that we worked together. And I'm grateful for that because there was a certain perspective that he brought that is not something that you're going to get, and not to say anything disparaging about the newer generations, as it were, but a guy like Ken that came from sort of the old school, very much appreciated, because he had an understanding and a grasp of things that I didn't have to explain a lot of things to him. He kind of intrinsically understood. And I'll say this about him. He was not the most welcoming, I should say, well, that's not the right word. He was not the most enthusiastic when it came to grappling new technological advancements. He was kind of an old school guy, but he still did. He still pursued it with gusto, and he still went at it with everything he had, and overcame a lot of fears that he had about that sort of thing. So he was a very, very talented man. Had one of the greatest set of pipes on anybody that I've ever heard in the radio world. He had just a magical voice, and but more importantly than that is he had a wonderful heart. And I'm gonna miss him dearly. And it's not gonna be the same without him here. But as I was talking, yesterday to some of our other folks here in the building, there's the mark that he left here. A little piece of that is going to live with us. And the time that I got to spend with him personally, that's an experience that I'm going to take with me. And now for the however many days I have left, I'm going to carry some of Ken with me. And that's that. It's sad to think that I'm never going to be able to talk to him, at least on this side of the horizon. Knowing that I have that piece of him that I can take with me gives me a little bit of comfort. And so I can't say enough about the man, and I'm really, really going to miss him.
Yeah, I hope his wife's doing okay. I'm sure that this is just devastating because it was so sudden and acute, and of course that's always difficult. But fortunately for him, it went fast. So he probably had an hour of pain, and then it was all over. He was probably unconscious on the way to the hospital. I don't know if they were trying to resuscitate him at that point or not. And again, I just cannot overstress the importance of following good doctor's advice. Don't smoke, and keep your weight down. Stay active. If you're on medication for cholesterol or high blood pressure or diabetes or gout or any other inflammatory process, rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or whatever, make sure you take your medicine, because if you decrease that inflammation, if you decrease the plaque and the stickiness to the blood vessels, and you decrease the damage to the lining of the blood vessels, you're going to greatly decrease your risk of having an early heart attack or stroke or some other problem. And it just, it really was sad, because as much as I love Ken, I got to tell you, Joe, he was not the most compliant patient.
Yeah.
But, that's just the way some people are, and you have to accept that that's the way it is. And, your doctor can't go home and be a policeman and sit there and watch you in the morning take your medications. That's not our place. Our place is to be a signpost and to be a leader. And, you have to make the decision in life whether you want to follow or lead. And I know there are a lot of people that are anti-vaccination and anti-medication and anti-big pharmaceutical companies. But let's remember, we're living longer, healthier, happier lives because of immunizations, number one. And then secondarily, the great advances we've made in pharmacology, as well as the technical advances we've made in medicine and in imaging and diagnosis and treatment. And you think about things like breast cancer 50 years ago, which was almost the kiss of death. And now we are keeping people, we're curing it early, we're catching it early, and we're curing it. And people who do have metastatic breast cancer or lung disease, we're keeping them alive longer. We've come so far, and all this is there for the taking, for you, for everybody. It's all there for us. And all you have to do is say, yeah, I'm in. And that doesn't mean you have to go along with everything your doctor says. And I certainly welcome people getting a second opinion, but, don't go to Google and don't go to your friends. If you're going to go to Google, hook up with Chat GPT. That's ChatGPT, that's AI. And I've been using that in the office during patient visits to counsel people and look for diagnostic and treatment regimens. And it's been pretty accurate, Joe. It's been pretty damn accurate. So if you want to know something, rather than going to a Google website or a Facebook or YouTube film or asking a friend, go there and put in your question, and it'll kick out an answer. And you'll find out, if you trust that platform, that a lot of what the doctor is saying is accurate. And we're here to help you. We're not just here to make money. I'm just I'm just sad to have lost someone who was such a good sidekick and wingman and interface for me, and it's going to be very hard to replace him. I've gone through 4 or 5 different wingmen on the show, Joe, and he was far and away the best one I've ever had.
Well, you don't replace somebody like Ken, and that's, I've had that experience with other folks here, but especially for somebody like him. There will be other people that are in this chair. There will be other folks that are facilitating the roles and responsibilities that he was executing. But we're never replacing him. We're never going to have anybody that has and that's that's just life, right? I mean, it's sort of a paradox. One of the best parts about life is the relationships that you make. But if you have, and we all want to live nice, long, happy lives, well, guess what? You make a lot of relationships, you live a nice, long, healthy life, and entailment of that is, you're going to lose people. And you don't replace them per se. So I don't look to replace Ken. Ken has a special place in this place and in my heart, and I know that in your heart too, Doc. But there will be somebody else that facilitates the role, and they'll build their own road, but it won't be without the memory of a very special man that occupied this territory quite capably and quite competently for a long time.
Yep, he's a good guy, and we loved him, and we'll miss him, and we hope for the best. And Joe, keep me informed as to when the funeral is and what we can do to help the widow out.
I definitely will.
I'm sure she's going to be fine, but in the acute crisis, the Torah, the Jewish Old Testament, says, don't offer sympathies for 2 weeks, because words cannot express the grief and pain that someone is feeling when they've lost a loved one. So I think the best thing we can do is just to be quietly supportive, and hugs and best wishes and all of that. So it's good advice coming from the Old Testament.
Sure. Well, it's like we talked about yesterday when we had this conversation. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to do. There's no action steps to take. It's just a sad day.
Yeah, and I think acceptance is acceptance is the key to all of our problems. We can't undo what's done, and although we're hurt and angry, ultimately we have to say, well, this is life. We come and we go. We're here and then we're not. And I like to think that ultimately we're all going to be ground back into stardust and recycled, and hopefully we'll come back as something even better.
Well,
so
yeah,
yep.
I think that he had a definitive spiritual path. I can say that it was it sort of aligns with my own as a believer. And so while yesterday, for those of us that are of that camp in this world, that was the part of yesterday that made it the easiest to handle from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think whatever gets you through something like this, and a lot of people have faith, and that's what does it for them. I think that's one of the most important things is that you have something to hold on to and believe in. Of course, as a doctor, I have a different outlook, and it doesn't mean that I don't believe in a God that looks like or acts like me, but I do believe that there are physical and natural laws that govern everything we do. And for me, that is God, the embodiment of those laws and rules and regulations that we can't violate in nature. And unfortunately, one of those is that everything's in flux. Or fortunately, you know, Joe, life's like a party. It can't go on forever. I mean, after a while, you want to go home. You've had enough. We just are sorry that it happened so early in life for this guy. What a
Yeah.
loss. Well, any rate, back to Trump. So Trump invokes the Alien Enemies Act and mass deportation effort. But then a judge yesterday said, no, you can't do that. And he made two plane loads of deportees to airport transport planes turn around and bring them back. Of course, goes up to this uh, fly. The hell is mass deportation? How's that used? Well, 88, uh, the Federalists were in power, and they wanted to keep us out of the war in Europe and in North Africa and Asia, basically a world war, the Napoleonic Wars that were cranking up, and the Democratic Republicans, who were the liberals back then, they wanted us to go to France's aid. And the Federalists said, no, you guys are crazy. This is going to end in a dictatorship. The French Revolution is not well thought out. It's not well founded. And indeed, Napoleon did take over and declared himself emperor. And he tried to conquer all of Europe, made the fatal mistake of marching into Russia. And I think he went in with 250,000 men and came out with 5,000. So the Russian winter defeated him, along with starvation and attrition and so on and so forth. So, at any rate, um, President Adams, who's been much maligned, he and the Federalists passed a set of laws, the Alien and Sedition Act, the Alien Friends Act, the Alien Enemy Act, and the Sedition Act, and these were all passed in 1798 in an attempt to uh, protect the federal government from foreign influence and from people who were critical of what the government was doing. And indeed, it gave the president the power to deport males over 14 years of age who were from countries that were considered enemies of the United States. And of course, the enemies of the United States are determined by the executive branch. The legislative branch is the one who makes a formal declaration of war and funds the military, but the president is the one who decides if we're going to have an enemy or a friend. And so this judge said, well, you can't do that. That's not what this is supposed to do. And this was a big deal. And a lot of this came undone several years later when these acts went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled them unconstitutional because they were also interfering with free speech. And one newspaper reporter in Philadelphia, his newspaper was shut down and he was seized and put in prison for a year or two for what was considered then un-American speeches and activities. So, at any rate, so the president is once again going back to court to fight for his agenda, and I think he'll win this one. This one has stayed on the books for over 200 years now, and it's not been undone, and it's been invoked. It's been invoked even by Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Delano Roosevelt most recently in the World War I and the World War II. And you say, well, yeah, but those were world wars. Well, I think that if you stop and consider all that's going on right now, you have to think that we are at the threshold of a world war. And with the ability to devastate each other the way we can now with our technology and our nuclear weapons and our JDAMs and our massive bombing and precise munitions power, that we would want to avoid it. Now, I think that we should consider ourselves at war and do everything we can to stop that and not let it escalate any further. And I think that's in part what the president is trying to do in the Ukraine. He's trying to tell the Russians, look, you're going to pull the world into war again, And this is not going to end well for you or for anybody else. So you have to stop and think not only of your own place and your own power and your own oligarchy, but you have to think of the 150 million people that are under you, that are counting on you to provide them with security and safety and freedoms that Franklin Delano Roosevelt enunciated so well. I think that we've got to stop and take the situation much more seriously. And part of the problem is that 95% of the people in the country have never traveled outside of the country, so they don't, or 90%, so they don't really know what's going on. And they look at Europe and Asia as something way far away and foreign, and they think that a lot of people think that the world hates us. They don't. They see us in conflict with the Houthis and with the Russians over Ukraine and other areas, and in conflict with communist countries like Venezuela, which are really socio-fascist countries. They're not communist countries. Come on, they're just fascist states. And we have to stop and take a breath and take all of this seriously. This is not a light time in history. And the best way to deal with it is through strength and through shoring up the defenses, and that means the borders, and protecting our own people from harm from internal aliens who are out here to do bad things to us and have bad intentions. And let's get things straightened up here. And Joe, I think it's time for me to take a break. I'm going to go and shed a few tears, and we'll be right back. I'm Dr. Bill, your Radio MD.
There is hope. Recovery is possible. For more information regarding opioids and treatment, go to cfbhn.org.
With SRN News, I'm Michael Harrington in Washington. President Trump ordered airstrikes on Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen last night. The rebels say a series of airstrikes struck the capital of Sana'a. 31 people were killed, according to the Houthis. The strikes come a few days after they said they would resume attacks on Israeli vessels sailing in waters off Yemen in response to Israel's actions in Gaza. There have been no Houthi attacks reported since then. Images circulating online show plumes of black smoke over the area of the Sana'a airport. Hamas says it will only release an American Israeli and the bodies of 4 other hostages it killed if Israel implements their ceasefire agreement. The terrorist group calls it a, quote, exceptional deal aimed at getting the truce back on track. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes yesterday killed 9 people in Gaza. This is SRN News.
Dr. Bill for Bay Area Medical, located at 6399 38th Avenue North in St. Pete, 727-384-6411, 727-384-6411. Full-service clinic with x-ray, heart imaging, ultrasound, stress testing, and minor surgery. We provide quality health care in a warm and friendly atmosphere. We are multilingual, well-trained, and certified. Most American insurance and new patients accepted. Bay Area Medical, home of Can Care, 727-384-6411. 727-384-6411.
Dr. Bill here. With social distancing and sheltering in place, telemedicine is here. Bay Area Medical Home of Can Care Clinic offers telemedicine for new and established patients. You can see me without an in-office visit. Schedule an appointment at 727-384-6411, 727-384-6411. When it's time for your appointment, type this web address into your cell phone or computer web browser, doxy.me/Bay Area Med. A cell phone works well and is all you really need. For computers, you need a web camera and speakers. We'll give you this address when you call for your appointment. We accept most insurances and travel insurances. Canadians and visitors, please call your travel insurance company for an authorization number prior to the visit. Co-pays and deductibles apply. Self-pay rates are available. Just ask. We accept credit cards, PayPal, and Stripe. 727-384-6411, 727-384-6411.
Dr. Bill here. My friends at St. Pete MRI and Sleep Diagnostics Diagnostics are your best choice for state-of-the-art MRI, CT, and sleep studies. Quality unsurpassed. 25 years experience makes St. Pete MRI my go-to imaging center. Self-pay rates are competitive and out-of-pocket cost a fraction of a hospital. Conveniently accessible from both sides of the bay at 750 94th Avenue North, St. Pete, near the Gandy. 727-577-2220, 727-577-2220.
At Simple Path Retirement, we don't answer to corporate management or shareholders. We answer to you. Start living your best life today. Visit simplepathretirement.com.
Breezy for today with clouds and sunshine. You'll see a thunderstorm in the afternoon, high 81. Some evening showers and a thunderstorm, otherwise clouds for tonight, low 61. And breezy, cooler on Monday with clouds giving way to sunshine, high 68. That's your AccuWeather forecast. I'm Andy Robb for AM 860, The Answer.
And we're back. This is Dr. Bill. We're doing a live show. Ken passed away. Crushing chest pain, radiating into his jaw and shoulders and back. And he was sweating and short of breath and nauseous, all classic signs of an acute heart attack or a blocked coronary artery. And he said, I just wanted to know if I did the right thing. I called 911. I said, oh, yeah. He said, should I come over to you? I said, no, you go to the nearest emergency room. You're having a heart attack. And they got him to the ER. And I guess from what Joe tells me that he expired in the ER. He had a cardiac arrest where the heart stopped beating. And that was the end for him. Sad situation. But the show must go on. And I guess that's the theme of today's show, is that we got to keep doing it and we got to keep going. I was reading about law firms suing Trump over retaliation. Trump has taken away the different firms' security clearance and access to government buildings, and these are big law firms that have worked to go after Trump both on the tort side, on the civil side, and on the criminal side. And so he's saying, well, you can't have access to any of this information or material anymore. You have been bad actors, and you haven't used it appropriately, and you've used it to punish your political and philosophical enemies. And so I'm not letting you in the building. And so they're countersuing, or they're suing, and saying they want the judge and the courts to block this executive order. I don't think it's going to hold. I think eventually, if it works its way up to the Supreme Court's going to say, hey, it's the executive branch's decision who can and who cannot come in. It's the executive branch's decision as to what documents are classified and what documents aren't. And this whole silly thing over Trump or Biden taking home classified documents, and the legislative branch, the Senate and the House saying, well, you can't do that. Well, yeah, you can. I mean, they don't belong to the legislative branch of government. They don't belong to Congress. They belong to the executive branch. And if the executive officer, chief executive officer, wants to take something home, he can. That's his prerogative. It's going to be the same way with blocking these law firms. And I got to tell you, I'm guessing this is largely the Jewish side of the family because of the ultra-liberal bent and the Trump derangement syndrome. And now it's bleeding over into Elon Musk. And I see where one senator, Democratic senator, he sold his Tesla in protest of Elon Musk. Well, that's kind of stupid, but if you think that's going to make a big difference, and then there are thugs that are destroying Tesla showrooms and burning Tesla cars and the Elon Musk truck, so it's just not it's just not a good situation. But it's a situation that was made by those who use the system to politically persecute conservatives. Come on, let's face it. I mean, I've experienced it, and the president has experienced it, and a lot of other people have experienced it, calling a riot at the Capitol building an insurrection when there were no weapons pulled. I mean, how can you have an insurrection without weapons? That's the whole idea of an insurrection, is you're going in to take over. That means insurrection means that you're going to usurp the power of the sitting government by force. And there wasn't that. And one woman was killed, one of the protesters on January 6th at the Capitol building. All she was doing was climbing out a window, and one of the Capitol cops shot her. She wasn't doing anything. She was trying to get away. What kind of Gestapo is this? So at any rate, we've got all that going on. Now, see where ICE arrested a Columbia student who was Mahmoud Khalil, who was an activist for the Palestinian cause and was organizing these campus riots and campus protests against Israel. And, most of these kids that are being pulled into this, they don't even know where Israel is. And they, when they say from the river to the sea, that means from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, and that's the area that the Israeli state occupies, and the Palestinians also live in that area. And I think they're thinking to wipe that whole area off the map. Well, they're going to get the people that they think they're trying to help. But I'll tell you what, if you took some of these people and you dropped them in the middle of the Palestinian enclave, they wouldn't come out alive. They'd be killed. They'd be raped. They'd be murdered. They'd be tortured. But you can't convince people of that, especially young people who haven't traveled and haven't seen anything. I guess this is just the way of life. And, of course, we have to allow protests in this country, but we don't have to abide people who are organizing riots and violent activities in the name of their political cause and using the money from God knows where. I'm sure it's coming from both ultra-liberal groups and Muslim groups that hate the Jews and hate the United States and hate everybody else. This guy was a student on campus. He's not now, but I think his wife is still a student. I think she's an American. At any rate, he's been deported, and now they're suing to try to get him back. I think he's probably down at Guantanamo by now. I think the president's going to have to stand up and really assert his authority here. Like I told you before, when Andrew Jackson got called down by the Supreme Court, and they said, "Mr. President, what are you going to do?" And he said, "Does the Supreme Court have an army?" He says, "I do." So he just continued to do what he wanted, even though the Supreme Court said what he was doing was unconstitutional. And he was one of our most popular presidents, by the way.
You may not remember this, Doc, but this was literally the very first conversation that you and I ever had together.
Yeah.
This is going way back in the day. Yeah, because for some reason, I don't know, when I first met you, you had a look on your face like, hey, this guy wants to talk about constitutional law. So we got into it, and like literally, hi, I'm Dr. Bill, I'm Joe, and we talked about I was lamenting at that time that the courts had, at whatever year this was, had overstepped their bounds on something. And so I was saying, look, the courts never had this sort of constitutional authority to do what they are doing. And I cited, whatever I cited. And you sat there very calmly, listened to whatever I had to say, and you said, well, I think that they set it all up to be a republic, and they did it in such a way so that way they would have it all set up as best they could and let the states fight it out from there. And from that point on, I looked at it that way, and that's kind of accurate. That's kind of, and as far as the judges are concerned right now, as far as the courts are concerned right now, I mean, you're seeing some of these rulings that are like, they may as well be appointing themselves as president, the way that they're doing these rulings. But the thing,
they're bleeding over into executive functions, and that's one of the complaints that the conservative movement has made is that the courts are trying to be legislative and executive, and they're not. They're judicial. That doesn't mean that they don't make common law, because common law is what the courts interpret laws that are on the books to be, and also on the common or what has gone before. So a lot of our laws based on English common law, but that doesn't give the courts the right to upend laws that are on the books that they don't like. Now, they can challenge them and say they don't think they're constitutional, and then that can go on up the ladder. And that's certainly a legitimate function of the lower courts to make challenges to what they or how they interpret the laws, but that doesn't give them right to make the law. So
Right.
there's a difference there, and we have to respect the judiciary's right to challenge the laws and say, I don't think this is constitutional, but we do have an ultimate umpire. We've got an ultimate referee in the Supreme Court.
Well, but you see, even there, right? I saw somebody yesterday making a post, and I had to sort of laugh at it because they said, when is the Supreme Court going to step in to rein in all of these activist judges? And I said, well, okay, look, what are you actually saying here? You're saying you want judges to rein in other judges. If we operate with the understanding that we have a system that is predicated on a checks and balances, and I'll agree with that, right? You've got three tiers, you've got, or you should say you've got three bodies that are supposed to be at the same tier: legislative, executive, and judicial. I would say, and I would challenge anybody that is a constitutional student to go ahead and check me up on this. The first two there, the executive and the congressional, are very well defined in the Constitution, but the judiciary really isn't. And if I ask you the question, what is the check on the court? There's not really an obvious answer to that. Supreme Court makes a decision, and that's the, law of the land until they decide to go ahead and change it. Except there's nothing in the Constitution that gives them that prerogative. What does give them that prerogative, and this is sort of this is known for 200 years, but nothing is done about it. Congress is ultimately what has the authority to overcome any of this. If Congress doesn't like what a court is doing, Congress has the authority to impeach that judge or even revoke that entire jurisdiction. They could just say that district doesn't exist anymore if they had the will to do it. And I would say that over the course of 200 years, a lot of hard decisions that really should have been made by the Congress, they sort of willfully gave up that power so that way they could avoid the responsibility of making those hard decisions, because instead they can offload it to an unelected, unaccountable body that, well, they make a decision. Well, we can't do anything about the courts. They just made a decision. Well, no, actually you can. You have the congressional authority to do so, but they're not, but you have to have the will, and the will has never been there. Maybe it'll get there now with all of this, but Congress is the ultimate check on the courts.
Well, the situation there is that if a judge violates certain rules and regulations and laws, the Senate can impeach them and remove them. There's no doubt about it, but you have to be very careful about that, because it can then become a political weapon. And so when one regime is in, when the Democrats have control, they can get rid of all the Republican judges. And when the Republicans are in control, they can get rid of all the Democratic judges. So, and these judges also have certain rights under the Constitution. It's probably a little better defined than we think.
Well,
and
I would challenge anybody to do that.
Federal judges are appointed for life.
Right.
And it takes a lot to, the high crimes and treason. That's a high bar to subject the president or the judiciary, the federal judges to, and it's not easy to prove. And we've seen that. And how many times has there been an actual impeachment? Right. That has gone to the Senate and passed? I don't think we've ever had one, have we? No, there's no president that's ever been removed by impeachment and trial by the Senate. The closest it came was
Andrew Johnson, right after Lincoln.
Andrew Johnson, right after the Civil War, and one vote saved him from being completely disgraced and kicked out.
Right. There's a difference between impeachment and conviction, is what you're making the distinction on, and you're right about that.
and you know, it was a legislative versus executive branch fight over appointments that Johnson made when Congress was in recess. And several years later, the Supreme Court had worked its way up to the Supreme Court, and they actually agreed with the executive branch. The executive branch did have that power according to the Constitution. So we have to be careful not to let the legislature manhandle or rough up the judiciary. You know, their job is as legislative passing laws body and as an oversight for judges and other federal, you know, president and executive officers who have overstepped their bounds and committed high crimes and treason.
Well, I would say, Doc, that the courts probably ought to offer just as much care in these decisions that they're rendering as far as stomping all over what Congress is doing. I mean, because that's what's going on here, right? You're saying be careful that Congress doesn't overstep, but these courts are overstepping hard. And what's the remedy? That's where I'm at with it.
Well, the remedy is that you appeal it to superior courts, to the Supreme Court, work its way up there, and then you've got a final arbiter. You've got dad, or whatever you want to call it. You've got parents up there that say this is the way it's going to be, and if you don't like it, too bad. You know, and we have to have some way to put an end to the battles that are going on between the various factions in the country, and this has worked quite well. I mean, we had one civil war, and luckily we've avoided any other civil conflicts like this. I mean, the Civil War was fought over two major issues, one being slavery, which was not only a legal and constitutional issue, but it was also a moral issue. And the other part of the Civil War that people forget about is the tariffs, by the way, that, you know, that Trump's imposing. The North imposed or wanted to impose tariffs, and that would have hurt the South and not the North. And we've got that same battle going on now, Joe. There are a lot of businessmen who say, look, you put these tariffs on, and we're having all of our stuff made in China, and we're going to have to go out of business or raise our prices or whatever. And what the executive branch is saying now, we'll bring the industries home and start them here. And, you know, they're saying, well, it'll cost more. It costs the consumer more. Well, I mean, that's the price you pay when you make your own loaf of bread. It's going to take you a little more energy than if you go up to Publix or Winn-Dixie or Kroger's or wherever and buy a loaf for $1.29. You know, it takes a lot more work than that, and you got to spend time and effort. Well, that's the way it goes, guys. I mean, it's good to have compartmentalization. It's good to have specialization. All these things help so that a doctor can be a doctor, and he doesn't have to be a lawyer and an accountant and a mason and everything else, because you don't want to put all that time and money into training a guy to be or a gal to be a doctor and then have them wasting their time on non-doctor pursuits. You know, I was talking with one of my Canadian patients years ago, and I said something about, I should really be more conscious of recycling. He said, Doc, we don't want you to recycle. We don't want you to worry about that and think about that. We want you to practice medicine. We'll take care of the recycling. We'll take care of the other aspects. That's why I have an accountant. That's why I have an attorney, because I don't want to have to do all of that, because then I won't be able to practice medicine effectively and give my patients the 100% that they need. So all of these things come into play, and I do think that there are still checks and balances, and ultimately we can take this up to the Supreme Court. And then you have to decide what fights you want to pick and which ones you want to take on. So then we have to stop and think about the importance of a specific aspect of the legislature or the executive branch that we don't agree with, and that's another check and balance. That makes us stop and think, well, maybe this isn't that big of a deal that we would want to spend $10 or $20 million on legal fees and all this emotion and anxiety fighting a decision that ultimately isn't going to make a lot of difference, and the bill's going to end in 10 years anyway. You know, it's quite quite an interesting process. It's like the Voter Rights Act that was passed in the 1990s. The Motor Voter Act, which said that if you came into the courthouse, you could show your driver's license and then you could get your card to vote. Well, the problem with that is that people can get a driver's license without being a citizen. And so the Supreme Court has looked at that, and they've shot down big parts of that. And the left wing, the Democrats want it in because it'll give them more power. Because most of the people who are immigrants, new immigrants, they want to be Democrats. They don't even know why.
30.
One of my friends who immigrated from Egypt when he was a kid, he said, "You know why?" I said, "No, why?" He says, "Because the Democratic Party tells them it's democracy." All right. Joe, good talking to you, buddy.
Love you, Doc.
We're out of here. I'm Dr. Bill, your radio MD. See you next week.
WGUL on W229DJ Dunedin. Powered by Prosperity Group. Contact Greg Ellie today at 864-989-0176.
No games, no gimmicks or dealer-added options. You get clear choice pricing only at Mazda of Clearwater. Mazda of Clearwater between Bay Drive and Ulmerton on US 19.
With SRN News, I'm Michael Harrington in Washington. President Trump ordered airstrikes on Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen last night. The rebels say a series of airstrikes struck the capital of Sana'a. 31 people were killed, according to the Houthis. The strikes come a few days after they said they would resume attacks on Israeli vessels sailing in waters off Yemen in response to Israel's actions in Gaza. There have been no Houthi attacks reported since then. Images circulating online show plumes of black smoke over the area of the Sana'a airport. Hamas says it will only release an American Israeli and the bodies of 4 other hostages it killed if Israel implements their ceasefire agreement. The terrorist group calls it a, quote, exceptional deal aimed at getting the truce back on track. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes yesterday killed 9 people in Gaza. This is SRN.